Welcome back to Haunted and Historic Australia for another episode of Criminals, Cutthroats and Convicts. In this episode, we look at stories where love goes too far. I love you to death. Most of us in our lives have felt in love. That warm, fuzzy feeling, meeting someone who you think you'll be with forever, after some time declaring love for each other. And you may be in love so much, you could say you'd love them to death. Now, we don't mean that we're going to kill someone with love. We just to love them until we die. Well, that's the meaning. But some people have taken it literally and have killed someone because they love them so much. Now, there's usually some motive behind it. There is love, but there's often jealousy or betrayal or something like that that causes one to murder the love of their life or someone they simply admire. These are two stories from the Western Australia area where crimes of passion have been committed. The first story is in Coolgardie, an outback town of WA, a mining town. Quite small now, but back in the day would have been booming. We start off with a girl, a 28-year-old dressmaker by the name of Elizabeth Farrell, and she's marrying Charles Yardborough Gold, a man from the military and in high esteem. He was from a long line of men in the military. They marry in Melbourne and moved to Coolgardie shortly afterwards. It is believed that Charles Yardborough Gold has some mining interests, possibly investments, and is there to oversee them. Whilst they are there, they have a boarder with them, a Kenneth Snodgrass, also from Melbourne, who is staying with them while he is trying to get his business off the ground. Now, a strange thing happens. Not long after they've moved to Coolgardie, Charles Yardborough Gold dies, and Elizabeth is left a widow. Now, Charles has many children, but it doesn't appear that he's had any with Elizabeth, and he didn't leave her much when he died. Mr. Snodgrass helped out with the funeral arrangements to give Elizabeth a hand. He was also married and had a family back in Melbourne who he was trying to bring across. A few months later, Kenneth Snodgrass takes over the bungalow dining rooms and tries to run it as a profitable business. As help to Elizabeth, he offers her to be a housekeeper there, so she can work to earn money for herself. A month later, Kenneth brings his family across from Melbourne, and they are all living at the bungalow dining rooms. It is noted that Elizabeth becomes close to Mrs. Snodgrass. They are quite friendly. Everything seems like it's going so well, but a month later, the business fails. The family are forced to move out. They move into a house in Toorak, which is close by to Coolgardie. And Elizabeth decides that she's going to start a course in nursing. For many months, Elizabeth is learning the ropes in nursing, and then she is put into Coolgardie again in the hospital. It is also noted that she is joined by one of the Snodgrass children. One of the eldest daughters is also in nursing, Janet Snodgrass, and Kenneth's cousin Rosa is the matron at the hospital. Elizabeth is able to stay on the campus. Kenneth makes many visits to the hospital. It looks as though he's there to see his daughter Janet, but he visits Elizabeth too, which was quite strange. Then again, they were all friends. So he's around quite a lot to visit Elizabeth as well as his daughter. At this time, we understand that he's not employed anymore, or his employment isn't paying very much, as he is in threat of losing the house. He is quite depressed. Perhaps Elizabeth is someone who he can confide in about his financial state. He's requested help from a distant relative, and that help was refused. He has really nothing going for him now. There is a ball, a charity ball at the hospital, and Elizabeth is very keen to go. And it seems on the night she gets dressed up to go, she is murdered. Why? And who murdered her? Well, if you haven't already guessed, Kenneth. Kenneth Snodgrass murders Elizabeth and then takes his own life. It is said that it was pretty much outside the area she's living, her tent. It has been recorded that many people heard the shots and they came running, but it was too late. Both were dead. No one really knows for sure why Kenneth shot Elizabeth. Was he borrowing money off her and she wouldn't lend it? Or were they having an affair and she ended it? His daughter Jane was in the tent when her father first arrived. He came and knocked on the door, but the ladies were getting ready for the ball. He stated he wanted to speak to Elizabeth. Janet told her father to wait and proceeded to leave the tent. When Elizabeth was ready, she went and spoke to Kenneth. There was one other nurse that was getting ready in the tent after Elizabeth went to meet Kenneth. She overheard them greet each other and even heard Elizabeth say, "It is too bad that you're not going to the ball. We thought you were going to give us a lift." She didn't hear much else of the conversation and proceeded to get dressed herself. She did, however, think that she heard Elizabeth call out to her. She proceeded to go towards where they were and then heard a gunshot. She knew what was going on from that moment and decided it was safer for her to go and get the security guard. Shortly after everyone was on scene, they worked out what had happened. Some witnesses said that Ken was acting strange earlier in the day, and another came forward to say that he'd borrowed a gun. Kenneth had said that the gun was for some pesky critters that were hanging around his vegetable garden or something to that effect, and that was why the gun was handed over. They believed that Kenneth was having an affair with Elizabeth, as many witnessed him visiting her quite often. It is believed that he didn't want her to go to the ball that night. Possibly he was jealous. No one was going to help him, and Elizabeth may have been the only comfort that he had. But what if she met someone? What if she married someone else? Perhaps he couldn't live with himself at the thought that Elizabeth may have danced with someone at the ball. Either way, it isn't really understood why he killed her, only that he did, and he committed suicide after. Now, the strange thing is that the hospital was there for some years, and shortly after the murders, many people have come forward and stated that they've witnessed seeing a woman in an elegant gown wandering around the area. Even over at the tennis court, one woman stated that it looked as though someone was on the court either dancing or playing tennis. Take your pick. And many others have come forward stating the same thing. Even more recently, a woman had said that she witnessed a woman coming towards her in an elegant gown, and she couldn't help but stare at the woman as she was very beautiful. As she walked past, the woman didn't take any notice of her, and she almost looked translucent, so much so that the lady put her hand out to touch the dress, and her hand went right through it. Pretty fearful after that, she made her way to her car pretty swiftly. But with so many people stating that they'd seen her, it was common knowledge around the hospital. If you spoke up at the hospital to any of the other staff, they'd more than likely have said, "Yeah, that's Lizzie. She was one of the nurses that 100 years ago was shot dead on these grounds." What a sad case that a girl was murdered out of jealousy. Well, there's another one, pretty similar, and around the same time. It was the 1920s, and in Perth, the government house was having a charity ball. It's strange that these charity balls seem to bring about suspicion and jealousy. Perhaps there were things going on at these charity balls that we don't really know all the details about. But nonetheless, the charity ball was held in the government house at Perth. There was a beautiful dark-haired woman by the name of Audrey Jacobs, an independent young woman, but used to getting what she wanted. She was in love with a handsome young marine engineer, Cyril Gidley. Cyril liked the ladies, and the ladies liked Cyril. Cyril had quite the reputation for breaking girls' hearts. He'd come from England only 2 years ago and had left a fiancée back home. When he arrived into Australia, he met a young girl from a country town and proposed to her. also. But then he met Audrey and wanted to settle down with her. So he wrote to the girl in the country town asking for the ring back, but not necessarily breaking it off. And he proposed to Audrey. But sometime within the next 2 years, something goes wrong and he breaks it off with her. Now he's flirting with other girls in town, and this infuriates Audrey. Perhaps this was his undoing. He'd finally pushed one of the women too far. And then arrived the night of the ball. The room was packed with many smart young couples, some in fancy dress. She had gone with a friend, dressed as Periot, a great pantomime actor, and she was having a great time until she noticed that Cyril was there, and he was with another woman, and they were close. Audrey was infuriated and left the party. She went straight home and found a shotgun. Whether this was hers or her father's is unclear. She took the shotgun down to the river and stated later that she was going to commit suicide, but she doesn't do this. She goes to St. Mary's Cathedral, where she'd spent a lot of her childhood. There she must have decided what she was going to do next, as she turns up back at the party with the shotgun in her hand. The party was in full swing, laughing, clapping, smoking cigarettes, and their cares were the last thing on their minds. They were having the best time. But soon that was all to end, as Audrey, in an electric blue dress, raised her arm. Whether it was premeditated or a moment of insanity, she squeezed the trigger. One shot rang out, and Cyril clutched his forehead. Blood was spurting out, and he fell to the floor. The room was in a panic. The music stopped, and everybody watched as Cyril Gidley died on the dance floor. There were screams and people going in different directions, a panic. Someone raised the police right away, and they were there within moments. They disarmed Audrey, who seemed to be looking over Cyril's body with a strange smile. Someone had actually heard her say, "I've got you now." She was brought to the police station, questioned, and then placed on trial. Defence counsel Arthur Ginger Hayes and his persuasive powers. Despite all the mounting evidence against Audrey, all the witnesses that saw her shooting had Audrey acquitted at the trial by putting the emphasis on the fact that Cyril was a player, you could say, breaking girls' hearts and running around proposing to everybody. It was enough to sway the jury in Audrey's favour. They even contacted his mother back in England to notify her of her son's death, and she had stated that she would let his fiancée over in England know that he wouldn't be coming back to her. Cyril had no friends and no family in Australia to step up to the plate for him and state that he was a good guy. His shipmates were in shock about the whole thing and didn't really help his cause. The letter that Cyril had written surfaced, where he was stating Audrey had threatened to kill him. But they combated that by stating that Cyril had been nasty towards Audrey and beaten her on several occasions. They had Audrey's mother and father take the stand to back these claims, and they did. They were not a wealthy family, but the council made Audrey out to be an upper-class lady, and she got off. She walked free, and many cheered her on. Audrey was liked in the community as well. An odd thing happened at the time of Cyril's funeral. A wreath was sent with a strange message. A note attached to the wreath stated it was from one who will never forget, and a message, "One day or other from this you will see, I have not forgotten how the position arose." They stated the handwriting was very close to Audrey's. But what a strange message to write. So Cyril Gidley is now dead, but he wouldn't be forgotten, for he would haunt the government house. Many have said that footsteps can be heard pacing in the ballroom of the government house. It was also said that Cyril Gidley, an Englishman, was an anti-royalist. He wasn't a fan of the royal family, and ghostly activity seemed to heighten in 1977 when King Charles III, a prince back then, was due to attend a ball to celebrate the Queen's Silver Jubilee. Organisers of this Jubilee would complain that things had been moved around, furniture placed in odd locations, glassware and crockery rearranged at night. Pot plants in buckets ready to be installed the next day were found dry and wilted, almost as if someone had killed them. Even a portrait of the Queen was tilted at an odd angle. The official explanation was that it was quite windy and perhaps the picture had been knocked by strong wind, as it was always said that the Government House ballroom was a little draughty. However, a security guard came forward and stated that a young man dressed in a tuxedo, fitting the description of Cyril Gidley, the ghost, was spotted leaning on the rail of one of the balconies, casually smoking a cigarette. The security guard called out and asked for the man to come down. Reaching for his high-powered torch, the figure turned, looked at the man, and simply walked away. The security guard rushed up the stairs to where the man had been standing. Shining his light around, there was nobody up there, but there was a faint smell of cigarettes in the air. He was sure of what he'd seen, and the smell confirmed it. Some have said that they witnessed a female ghost in the ballroom, but Cyril Gidley is the only recorded death in the Government House. It would be hard for a man to be mistaken for a woman. And as for Audrey, she married an American and went to live in the United States, and it is presumed that that is where she is buried. It is a strange case though, especially since Audrey got off. I wonder if the guilt was carried by her for the rest of her life, or if she felt justified in her actions. Maybe America was too far for Cyril to travel and haunt her, so instead he remained in the ballroom, possibly wondering where the partygoers had gone. Yes, love is a strange thing, and sometimes can lead to strange circumstances. These are just 2 stories, but there are many more. We hope you enjoyed this episode on loving someone to death. There are so many stories in Australia's history, stories with mystery and scandal and murder and the paranormal, and you can catch most of them here. So stay tuned.
It's murder on the dance floor.